There are some nights that split a life in half so cleanly, a man can tell you exactly who he was before the door closed, and exactly who he became after it did. By the time Malik Vance stepped out of his truck that Tuesday night, the city was slick with rain and glowing in the way Atlanta always does when the weather turns mean and expensive at the same time. The towers of Buckhead shimmered against the wet black sky. Headlights smeared across the garage walls. Somewhere below, traffic on Peachtree dragged out a tired metallic hum that sounded like the last nerve of a long day finally giving up. Malik had been up since before dawn. He had spent the day at a development site in Midtown, dealing with a foundation issue that should have been caught 2 inspections ago. Keeping subcontractors calm, keeping the engineer focused, keeping the whole job from sliding into the kind of chaos rich people call unfortunate and working men call expensive. His shirt still carried the faint smell of concrete dust and rain. His coffee had gone cold hours earlier. He had a folded grocery list in his jacket pocket and cilantro written at the top, because he had promised to make chicken soup that weekend. He was thinking about cilantro when he saw the suitcases. They were sitting outside the penthouse door, side by side in the polished corridor, as neat and deliberate as if some invisible hotel staff had arranged them for pickup. One large, one carry-on, both his. The sight stopped him so completely he didn't take another step for a full 3 seconds. Then he noticed something lying a little off to the side on the marble floor. His father's old Seiko watch. It must have slipped from the inside pocket of the larger bag when someone dragged it out. Malik bent slowly, picked it up, turned it over in his palm, and checked the crystal. Not cracked, still ticking. Good. That was the kind of man he was. Even with his life standing there in pieces in a hallway, he checked the watch first. The penthouse door opened before he could reach for the handle. Brianna stood there, framed by warm chandelier light and city glass, wearing a black designer dress that looked brand new, and a face he had never quite seen turned fully toward him until that moment. It wasn't anger. Anger would have meant she still felt wounded enough to care. It wasn't grief either. Grief would have meant loss. This was contempt, sharp and polished and almost proud of itself. "Malik," she said, his name falling from her mouth the way a woman says the name of a thing she no longer wants in the house. He looked at her, then at the bags, then back at her. "I had Gerald bring your things out," she said. It seemed cleaner. Malik didn't answer right away. He slipped the watch into his palm and closed his fingers around it, feeling the steady, mechanical pulse against his skin. "We are not on the same level anymore," she said. Behind her, the penthouse was glowing. Italian marble, custom lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of space that doesn't just hold money, it announces it. Brianna lifted one hand, small and elegant and dismissive, as if all of it were evidence. "I have $50 million now," she said. $50 million. And you're still driving that truck. You still come home smelling like a job site. I'm done pretending this is a partnership." Malik's face barely changed, but something inside him went very still. "You sure you want to end it like this, Brianna?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not weak, quiet the way deep water is quiet. She gave a short laugh that had no warmth in it at all. "There's no going back from this." "I know," he said. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Maybe she had expected pleading, maybe anger, maybe disbelief, but not that. Not a man standing in the hallway with rain on his shoulders and calm in his voice like he already knew something she didn't. "Get out," she said. Then the door shut. The electronic lock gave one clean beep. Final. Surgical. The sort of small sound that can echo through a man for years if it happens at the wrong moment. Malik stood alone in the corridor while rain drifted through an open window down the hall and cooled the back of his neck. He looked at the closed door. Then he looked down at the watch in his hand. He wound it once, slow and precise, listening to the tiny click of a mechanism that kept perfect time no matter what kind of foolishness human beings wrapped around it. Then he smiled. Not because he was happy, not because being thrown out by the woman he had spent 14 years loving had somehow stopped hurting. He smiled because Brianna Vance had just celebrated the one thing that would ruin her. You see, the $50 million she believed she had inherited free and clear was not an inheritance in the way she imagined. It was not a gift. It was not power. It was a structure. A trap built by a dying man who knew exactly what greed looked like when it put on lipstick and good manners. The estate had been placed inside a private trust burdened with matching debt. Every asset was leveraged. Every property was tied down. Every glamorous dollar had an anchor tied to its ankle. And there was only one person in the world with the authority to call that debt due. The man standing in the hallway with a rain-speckled work shirt, an old Seiko watch, and 2 suitcases at his feet. So before we go any farther, if you like stories where the quiet one turns out to be the one everybody should have feared, go ahead and hit like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because this one doesn't just get good, it gets surgical. Malik Vance had always been the kind of man people underestimated because they mistook stillness for limitation. He didn't explain himself much, didn't flex, didn't fill silence just because other people were afraid of it. He believed in useful things, sharp tools, honest work, contracts read twice, promises kept once and properly. If something in a house was broken, he fixed it before anyone else even noticed it had become a problem. If something in a business was slipping, he usually saw it 6 months before the rest of the room started using words like unexpected. 7 years earlier, that quality had saved Hayes Construction from dying. At that time, Malik had a modest townhouse in East Atlanta, a retirement account he had built carefully, and a marriage that still looked from the outside like one of those solid, blessed unions people point at in church and quietly envy. Brianna loved introducing him then. Back then, she looked at him like he was a miracle in work boots. She would slide her hand around his arm and tell people, "My husband can fix anything." What she meant was he made her feel safe. What she didn't understand was that safety is one of the rarest luxuries on earth, and people born around comfort are usually the first to price it too low. Hayes Construction had been started by Brianna's father, Reginald Hayes, decades earlier with 2 employees, 1 pickup truck, and the kind of reputation that takes half a lifetime to build and 1 bad year to bury. Reginald was old-school Atlanta. Church on Sunday, handshake that meant something. A man who believed paying your people on time was a moral issue, not just an accounting one. He had turned the company into one of the city's most respected mid-sized contractors, and then the market shifted. 2 large projects stalled, a lender tightened terms, vendors started pressing, and in less than a year the whole thing was 48 days from collapse. Payroll was bleeding, equipment liens were piling up, contracts were frozen in legal mud. Reginald was too proud to beg and too tired to fight the way he once had. Brianna cried in the kitchen. The bank called every morning. The people at church said they were praying. Malik sat down with a yellow legal pad and started doing math. That was how he loved people. Not theatrically, not emotionally first. He loved them by moving weight off their chest and onto his own shoulders. He sold his townhouse. He emptied his retirement savings and paid the penalty without complaining. He called every professional favor he had earned in more than a decade of construction work. He walked into rooms full of men who had already decided Hayes' construction was finished and made them listen anyway. He negotiated directly with bankers who mistook his calm for softness until they realized, too late, that he understood their numbers better than they did. He restructured debt, reopened stalled lines of credit, rebuilt trust with vendors, one phone call at a time. He worked mornings on active sites, afternoons in conference rooms, nights at the kitchen table with ledgers, invoices, and coffee. Within 11 months, the company was solvent. Within a year, it was growing. On a Sunday afternoon after service, Reginald Hayes shook his son-in-law's hand in the driveway and said, with wet eyes he didn't bother hiding, "You didn't have to do that, son." "Yes, sir," Malik said. "I did." That following week, Brianna wrapped both arms around him in their kitchen and whispered, "You're my hero." There are a lot of sentences people say when life is hard that they don't mean deeply enough to survive prosperity. Years passed. The company strengthened. Money returned. Reputation settled back into place. But something in Brianna began shifting so gradually no one named it at first. She stopped asking how the projects were doing and started asking how the accounts were structured. She stopped caring about the people on staff and began caring about the valuation of the firm. She developed a taste for the kind of luxury that doesn't just want comfort, it wants witnesses. Her father noticed. So did the company accountant. So, eventually, did Malik. But Malik never confused seeing with reacting. He watched. Reginald, meanwhile, got sick. Pancreatic cancer has a way of stripping all unnecessary illusions from a family. It turns everyone into exactly who they are. Some become gentler. Some become selfish. Some become holy. Some become organized. Reginald became brutally honest in private and increasingly silent in public. He watched his daughter more carefully in those final months than she ever knew. 18 months before that rainy night in the hallway, Reginald checked into Emory for what would be his last serious stay. Brianna assumed he wanted to discuss operations. She sat in the waiting room scrolling her phone while Malik went in alone. The old man looked smaller in the hospital bed, but not weaker in the eyes. He took Malik's hand and said, "Listen to me all the way through before you answer." Malik sat down. Reginald explained that he had restructured everything. The company, the properties, the accounts. The full estate value, roughly $50 million, had been transferred into a private, irrevocable trust. But attached to it, by deliberate design, was matching debt. Asset for asset, dollar for dollar. Not public debt, structured, internal, enforceable. One beneficiary, one creditor. Malik. For a long moment he said nothing. "She's your daughter," he finally said. Reginald closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. "She is, and I love her. But I know her. And I know what money is going to pull out of her if no one stands in the way." He squeezed Malik's hand with what strength he had left. "I didn't build this for greed to eat it. If she chooses loyalty, the structure will protect her. If she chooses vanity and theft, the structure will stop her. Do not show your hand." Let her make the choice herself. When she does what I fear she will do, preserve what we built. Malik sat there with the weight of it settling into him. Not revenge, not punishment, preservation. Yes, sir, he said. Reginald nodded once. Good. That conversation never left Malik. Not in the hospital, not at the funeral, not when the flowers arrived from half the city, not when Brianna cried beside the casket in black silk and accepted condolences from people who loved her father enough to ignore, for one day, the hard, bright hunger already rising behind her eyes. A few weeks after the funeral, Malik's mother, Gloria Vance, spotted Brianna at a restaurant with Darius Langford. Gloria was the kind of woman who could look across a room and read moral weather the way old farmers read the sky. She didn't make scenes. She didn't gossip. She simply observed, paid her check, went home, and texted her son. Baby, your wife is not being your wife right now. Malik read the message in his truck with rain needling the windshield. He stared at it. Then he typed back. I know, Mom. I'm preparing. That same night, he called Aisha Thompson. If you've ever known someone whose mind feels like a locked briefcase full of knives and facts, that was Aisha. She ran a forensic audit and legal recovery practice from a quiet office downtown and had the unnerving gift of making liars sound tired after only 3 minutes in a room with her. She and Malik had worked together during the original Hayes restructuring. He trusted her because she was exact, not warm. Warmth is easy to fake. Accuracy is not. He told her everything. The trust, the debt structure, Reginald's instructions, Gloria's message, Brianna, Darius. Aisha listened without interrupting. She made a few notes, then she asked, How patient do you intend to be? Long enough for the facts to finish speaking for themselves. How long is that? 18 months. She nodded. Then let's build something that survives court. From that night on, Malik and Aisha worked in parallel. Quietly, legally, completely. A full forensic review of Hayes Construction's books, account tracing, vendor scrutiny, expense classification, property position review, mortgage acquisition strategy, trust enforcement options. They mapped everything. They documented every irregularity. They prepared for scenarios instead of emotions. And while all of it was happening, Malik kept living like the same dependable man Brianna had already decided was beneath her. He went to work. He cooked on Sundays. He sat at the end of the couch in the evenings with project files in his lap. He said nothing about her perfume changing, nothing about late nights, nothing about the growing carelessness of a woman who believes the person across from her is too steady to ever become dangerous. Some nights she came home near midnight and found him reading in the living room. He would look up and say, "Long day?" She'd murmur something non-committal and head to the bedroom. And he would sit there in the hum of the refrigerator and the low city noise beyond the windows, winding his father's watch one careful turn at a time, thinking about endurance, about how patience can look passive to people who have never had to use it as a weapon. Over the next year and a half, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Money moved. Not recklessly. Brianna was too image-conscious to be sloppy in obvious ways. But greed almost always starts by calling itself temporary. A little personal spend here, a reimbursement there. Corporate card misuse disguised as client hospitality. Transfers shaped just under thresholds that trigger casual scrutiny. Then bolder moves. accounts connected to Darius, consultation fees that didn't match real work, personal purchases hidden under operational language. It added up because it always does. By the time Brianna threw Malik out of the penthouse, Aisha had enough documentation to set fire to their entire illusion in open court. What Brianna didn't understand was that Malik had not spent those 18 months waiting helplessly. He had been positioning. The penthouse she adored? Its mortgage had been carefully acquired through the trust structure. The estate she boasted about. Every inch of it could be frozen, enforced, or reclaimed. The company she treated like a private luxury account? Under audit. The man she called nothing? Fully prepared. 2 weeks after throwing him out, Brianna decided humiliation would be the perfect finishing touch. She called the event Inheritance and Rebirth. That alone tells you almost everything you need to know about the season of arrogance she was in. She reserved the Grand Hyatt Ballroom in Atlanta, had elegant invitations printed, sent them to pastors, business owners, old family friends, city people, money people, and legacy people. The sort of guest list a woman builds when she wants her personal choices ratified by a crowd. She wore champagne silk. Darius stood beside her openly now. The hidden affair had matured into the kind of polished shamelessness that expects to be admired once it stops pretending. She even sent word to Malik that the final divorce papers would be available that night. Not at an attorney's office, not privately. At the event, in front of everyone. She wanted him to sign away the marriage and what she believed were shared assets under chandeliers, in public, while Atlanta watched. She wanted witnesses not because she needed legal protection, but because she wanted social victory. She wanted the room to see her rise above him. That Saturday morning, Malik went to his mother's house. Gloria made biscuits the proper way, with honey butter in the blue ceramic dish she had owned since he was a boy. Malik sat at the kitchen table where he had once done homework and watched her move around the stove with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has survived enough life to know when silence is the right form of love. "You nervous?" she asked. "No, ma'am." She turned and studied him. "You sure?" He thought about it. "I'm sad, Mama. That's different." Gloria set down the towel, came over, and put both hands on his face like she used to when he was a child, trying not to cry over something that mattered more than he had words for. "Your father would be proud of you," she said. "And Reginald would be too." Malik covered one of her hands with his. "I know." That evening, he arrived at the hotel in a dark charcoal suit, open collar, no tie, looking like a man who had not dressed to impress anyone because he no longer needed anything from the room. Beside him walked Aisha Thompson, carrying a leather briefcase thick with everything Brianna should have feared long before that night. And listen, if you're still here and you appreciate stories where patience beats arrogance every single time, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment, because this next part is the kind of public reckoning people remember for years. The ballroom was glowing when they entered. The music was tasteful, the lighting flattering. The skyline outside the windows glittered like expensive approval. Conversation rolled softly across linen and crystal. People laughed the careful laughs of a polished social crowd. Then Malik stepped inside, and the room changed temperature without changing volume. Heads turned, conversations paused, and tried not to look like they had paused. The older guests knew exactly who he was. Some of them had watched him save Hayes Construction. Some had known Reginald for decades. Some remembered the years Brianna still looked at Malik like his steadiness was the safest place in her life. Brianna saw him from across the room, and her smile slipped for just a fraction of a second before she rebuilt it. She crossed the floor with Darius half a step behind her. "So you came," she said lightly, for the benefit of anyone close enough to hear. "I was beginning to think you'd spare yourself the embarrassment." Malik looked at her, calm as ever. "You invited me." She gestured toward a central table where a manila envelope sat between flower arrangements. "The papers are there. It'll only take 5 minutes." Before he answered, he let the silence breathe. Then he said, "Before I sign anything, I want to ask you one question. You've told everyone here you inherited $50 million. Do you actually know what that $50 million is?" The smile on her face turned brittle. "It's mine," she said. "My father left it to me." Malik held her gaze for 1 second longer. Then he looked at Aisha. Aisha stepped forward, placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and began laying out documents in neat, merciless order. No performance, no flourish. Just tabs, certifications, seals, records, and the quiet authority of paper that has already won. Her voice carried cleanly. The Hayes estate, valued at approximately $50 million, was transferred into a private, irrevocable trust. Said trust was structured with matching debt obligations secured against all assets contained within it. Mr. Malik Vance is the sole beneficiary and the only authorized creditor with standing to call that debt. The room went still in the way only educated rooms do when scandal first arrives. Without shouting, but with the unmistakable sound of many people realizing at once that they are witnessing the collapse of a false narrative. Brianna stared. "That's not possible," she said. Aisha flipped to the relevant pages. Certification, assignment, notarized filings, independent counsel, all valid. Darius had gone pale. Then Aisha placed down a second set of documents. "This is separate. Over the last 18 months, approximately $2.8 million was diverted from Hayes Construction operating accounts into 2 private channels. One tied to Brianna Vance. One tied to Darius Langford. Supporting evidence includes bank records, transfer authorizations, internal accounting records, and associated correspondence. The conduct constitutes fraud and misappropriation." The silence broke into a rush of whispers so sharp it might as well have been thunder. People turned. Older men who had known Reginald lowered their eyes in disappointment so severe it felt almost ceremonial. Women who had once hugged Brianna at fundraisers now stared at her as if trying to understand when exactly the rot had set in. Darius looked around the room like a man calculating exits. Brianna gave a thin laugh. "You made this up." Malik's voice was gentle, and somehow that made it worse. "No," he said. "Your father saw what was coming." The look on her face changed then. Not fully broken yet, but shaken. Aisha set down a third document. "At 3 o'clock this afternoon, the outstanding mortgage on the Buckhead penthouse currently occupied by Brianna Vance was legally acquired through the trust. As of today, that property belongs entirely to Malik Vance." A woman near the front whispered, "Lord." It spread through the room in waves. Not noise, recognition. The very home Brianna had used as a stage when she threw him out. The same doorway where she told him they were no longer on the same level had already become his before she finished getting ready for this event. Now Brianna was no longer performing for the room. Now she was trying to understand the ground beneath her feet and finding out it had been engineered by someone else. Malik reached into his breast pocket. What he pulled out was not another contract. It was a letter. The paper had been folded and unfolded enough times to soften at the creases.
Even from a short distance, several people in the room recognized the handwriting immediately. Reginald Hayes, deliberate and old-fashioned, every stroke neat as if character itself lived in penmanship. On the outside were the words, "For the man who stayed." Malik unfolded the letter. His voice was low and steady when he began to read. "Malik, my son, if this letter is being read aloud, then my daughter has made the choice I feared she would make. For that, I am deeply sorry."
I am sorry for you, and I am sorry for her, because she does not yet understand what she has lost. I built Hayes Construction with my hands, my father's name, and a lifetime of mornings before sunrise. I nearly lost it once. You saved it. Not because the law required it, not because blood obligated you. You saved it because you are the kind of man who protects what he loves and finishes what he starts. I could not leave this legacy vulnerable to greed and call that love. Real love preserves. It does not indulge destruction. If my daughter ever turns you out and chooses money over loyalty, let her know this. The Hayes legacy was never built for vanity. It was built to endure. It was built to be carried by someone with the wisdom and steadiness to protect it. You are that man. You always have been. I am proud of you, son. Take care of what we built together. Reginald Hayes. When Malik lowered the letter, there was no sound in the ballroom for several long seconds. Not music, not laughter, not even cutlery. Just the kind of silence that arrives when truth has finally said something no one can take back. And that was when Brianna broke. It happened fast. She stepped forward as if she could grab the letter and somehow reclaim authority over the story. But one heel caught in the edge of the carpet runner and she went down hard. The champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. One knee, then both palms, then the full collapse of a woman whose self-image had just split open in front of 200 people. The sob that came out of her was ugly in the purest sense of the word. Unguarded, wet, involuntary, beyond image management. Not the crying of someone caught. The crying of someone finally hearing, maybe for the first time, what the people who loved her had been trying to tell her without words for years. Nobody rushed immediately. Not because the room was cruel, because some moments are too honest to interrupt. Across the ballroom, Darius started moving toward a side corridor with the careful speed of a man pretending not to flee. He got about halfway there before two security officers stepped into his path and asked him to remain where he was. Aisha had anticipated that too. A hotel staff member helped Brianna to her feet. Her makeup streaked, her hair loosening, her shoulders shaking. She looked at Malik across that glittering room, and what she searched for on his face was probably anger, or satisfaction, or some masculine cruelty she could understand and hate. What she found instead was sorrow. Plain, real, tired sorrow. The look of a man who had loved faithfully for 14 years, had watched the person he loved walk deliberately into ruin, and had not enjoyed being right for even 1 second. "You hid all this from me," she whispered. Malik shook his head once. "No," he said softly. "I prepared for it. That's different." He returned the letter to his pocket. "I didn't do this for revenge, Brianna. Your father asked me to protect what he built. I did exactly that." Then he nodded to Aisha. The security team escorted Brianna and Darius out through the side corridor. Conversation returned in fragments, then waves. The chandeliers kept burning. The city outside kept shining. But something irreversible had happened in that room. A false hierarchy had died. For the first time in 18 months, Malik felt the quiet that comes when a burden ends not suddenly, but correctly. The legal process after that moved with the brutal efficiency that only complete documentation can produce. Aisha filed the fraud action the following Monday morning. 22 exhibit folders, cross-referenced entries, transfers, account trails, corporate charges misclassified as business expenses, personal luxury purchases tied to company funds. Evidence stacked so cleanly the opposing attorneys had nowhere to stand that didn't collapse under them. Brianna hired counsel, then different counsel, then different counsel again. Darius tried damage control. It didn't matter. The court ordered repayment of the diverted funds plus penalties, interest, and costs. Non-compliance would open the door to criminal consequences. There was no serious appeal path because there was no serious factual defense. Facts are rude that way. They don't care how elegant your outfit was at the party. To pay what she owed, Brianna started selling. The luxury SUV, designer luggage, the couture wardrobe, jewelry, handbags bought with company money and confidence. The diamond necklace she wore the night of the ballroom collapse was sold too. It covered only a fraction. She moved out of the penthouse and into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Smyrna. A clean place, perfectly livable. Ordinary in the way she had spent years training herself to view as failure. Darius's professional life disintegrated even faster. Once the public case opened the door, old complaints started finding daylight. His license did not survive the review process. People who build careers on polish often forget how quickly polish peels when the wood beneath it is soft. The divorce itself ended quietly. No drama, no final confrontation. Malik signed the documents in Aisha's conference room with a plain black pen, thanked her, and went back to work. That was another thing about him. Even after everything, he didn't become theatrical. He didn't need reinvention. Good men don't always need a new personality after betrayal. Sometimes they just need the truth to stop sitting in the dark. Now, somewhere around here in the story is where a lot of people expect the revenge fantasy to end. With the wife ruined, the affair exposed, the husband vindicated, fade to black. But life is rarely that lazy when it decides to be generous. Because while Brianna was spending inherited illusions, Malik had not only been protecting a legacy, he had quietly allowed himself to begin again. Her name was Elena Washington. She was 45, a pediatrician at Grady Hospital, and she had the kind of presence that made other people tell the truth without feeling manipulated into it. Warm without being naive, direct without being hard. The sort of woman who had spent enough years in hospital rooms with terrified parents and sick children to know exactly which things matter and which things are only decoration pretending to be important. She had met Malik years earlier at a charity renovation project for the pediatric floor. Hayes Construction had donated materials. Malik had shown up personally because that's what he did. She brought coffee to the crew one morning and ended up talking to him about structural loads, impossible repair deadlines, and the strange courage children sometimes have when adults around them are falling apart. She walked away that day thinking, that is a very good man. Not exciting in the cheap sense, not flashy. Good. And unlike many people, Elena knew the value of that immediately. They lost touch. Then, 9 months before the ballroom night, Malik called her. He was careful, almost formal. I don't know if you remember me. She smiled into the phone before she answered. I remember you. They started with dinners,
then long conversations. Then the kind of quiet companionship mature people recognize as rare. No performance, no games, no trying to be more impressive than honest. They were two people who understood their own minds and had already learned that peace is far more intimate than drama. By the time the court finished closing the chapter with Brianna, Malik and Elena were engaged. Brianna found out in the most ordinary modern way possible. A photograph online from the night of the hotel event. Malik outside the entrance near the car, calm on his phone, and through the passenger side window, a woman visible in the background, sitting quietly and reading while she waited. Not posing, not claiming him, just there, steady.
When Brianna asked through legal channels who Elena Washington was, the response returned in writing. Elena Washington is my fiancée. We are to be married in March. No extra explanation. None was needed. I want you to sit with that for a second, because there's a lesson in it a lot of people miss. The loud ending Brianna staged for herself was never the true opposite of what Malik was building. The true opposite was Elena. Not wealth versus poverty, not public humiliation versus private victory, but emptiness versus peace, performance versus sincerity, hunger versus home. And if that contrast means something to you, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay all the way to the end, because the final part of this story is the kind of ending people don't just enjoy, they need it. Late autumn in Atlanta has a certain kind of morning light. It comes in sideways, golden and patient, turning glass towers warm before the streets below fully wake up. One such morning, Malik stood on the penthouse balcony with a cup of coffee in one hand and his father's Seiko watch in the other. The penthouse was his now. Not in theory, not in a document folder. In fact. Behind him, the kitchen held evidence of real life instead of curated image. A French press Elena had brought over. A small list on the counter for curtains in the guest room. Notes about a dripping faucet. Wedding details. Flowers Gloria had opinions about. The beginnings of ordinary domestic happiness, which is less glamorous than revenge and infinitely more valuable. Malik turned the watch over, wound it once, and listened to the click. He looked over the skyline, some of whose buildings his teams had helped raise. He thought about his father, about Reginald, about what it costs to love people and work honestly in a world that keeps trying to teach you that louder things matter more. Then, he said softly, to the city and to no one, "I did it, Dad." The balcony door slid open behind him. Elena came out in bare feet, slipped her arms around him from behind, and rested her chin near his shoulder. They stood like that for a minute without filling the silence, two people secure enough not to perform intimacy for each other. Then she said, with a trace of amusement, "The guest room still has no curtains." "I know. And the kitchen faucet is still dripping." "I know that too. And your mother has called me 4 times this week about hydrangeas." That made him laugh. A real laugh, full and unguarded, rising from somewhere below the ribs. The kind of laugh that doesn't just signal happiness, but healing. "Let her have the hydrangeas," he said. Elena handed him his second cup of coffee. She always brought 2. "Are you all right?" she asked. Not anxiously, not fishing, just lovingly direct. Malik thought about it before answering, because he was the kind of man who treated honest questions with respect. "Yes," he said. "I really am." And he meant it. Not the performative, "I'm okay," people use while still carrying knives of hurt around inside them. He meant peace. The actual settled feeling of a person who carried something heavy for a long time, set it down carefully, and discovered he did not need to pick it up again, just because it had once belonged to him. Later that morning, Gloria arrived with sweet potato casserole and enough opinions to furnish a second household. She walked into the penthouse, looked around, and took everything in with the expression of a woman who had predicted this outcome long before anyone else was ready to admit where the road was leading. She set the dish down, went to her son, put her hands on his face and said, "I'm proud of you. You've already told me that. I'll keep telling you until you believe it properly," she said. Then she turned toward Elena and announced that the guest room situation was unacceptable and would be handled that afternoon. Elena laughed. Gloria winked. The hydrangea negotiations resumed. And just like that, the space Brianna had once used to measure status became what it had never really been before: a home. Later, while Gloria and Elena debated centerpieces and curtain fabric with the cheerful seriousness only women in full domestic command can bring to such matters, Malik stood again by the balcony railing. He thought of Brianna then, not with triumph, not even with anger, just with the clean sadness reserved for someone you loved for a long time and finally understood you could not save from themselves. He did not hate her. He did not wish further punishment on her. He simply accepted the truth of what had happened. She had mistaken quietness for weakness, patience for lack of ambition, steadiness for smallness. She had looked at a man building an empire in the background of her life and seen only a man who was standing still. She had been catastrophically wrong. And for the first time, Malik understood something with perfect clarity. He had not lost anything that was truly his. Not his character, not his work, not his mother's love, not Reginald's trust, not the ability to build, not the ability to be chosen rightly by someone worthy of him. There are people who think justice always arrives with shouting, sirens, headlines, and dramatic music. But a lot of the deepest justice in this world arrives quietly. It arrives in documents read carefully, in years of patience, in the collapse of lies under the weight of record-keeping, in the dignity of not becoming ugly just because ugliness was done to you, in finding out that the people who underestimated you were studying the wrong thing all along. By the time the morning light had fully settled across the city, Malik slipped the watch back into his pocket and turned toward the sound of laughter coming from inside. The guest room still needed curtains. The faucet still needed fixing. There were wedding flowers to decide on. There was coffee to finish. There was a family waiting in the next room. And that, more than the ballroom, more than the court order, more than the penthouse deed, was the final victory. Because in the end, Brianna inherited money she never understood and lost the man who would have made any life with her solid. Malik inherited responsibility, carried it correctly, and built himself a future no performance could imitate. If you want the truth stripped all the way down, it's this: loyalty is still the one currency that never loses value. Read every page before you celebrate the number at the bottom. Pay attention when a quiet person keeps showing up for you without applause. And never confuse still water with shallow water. Some of the deepest men on earth don't make noise. They just keep time.